Jane Halton, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Last time we spoke, which was at the eHealth Summit in Melbourne, you said at the time that your biggest challenge was working with the partners across the industry.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, just in the last 12 months, how challenging is the industry engagement aspect of your work?
This is a very competitive space, and there are a lot of people with a lot of opinions and a lot of smart people, and so sometimes we don't always agree with everybody. That said, I do think the level of industry engagement and I do think the productive dialogue has really improved, and I offer my thanks to people for their preparedness to sometimes set aside some of that history and now get on with trying to do things which will actually improve their business but also improve health for Australians.
Obviously, one of the big changes that's going on in the industry is your new role as the System Operator for the PCEHR.
Yeah.
When does that take effect?
Well, basically the legislation that gives us that, together with all the arrangements, come into play on the 1st of July.
Right.
So it's in anticipation at the moment. One never likes to assume that everything will pass parliaments, but yes, the 1st of July.
And it strikes me this is another transitional moment. If you like, we've had a transitional authority and now we have a transitional role for you. Can you tell me what's behind the decision?
Well, if you think about being able to talk to the community about how this will work, and particularly with people's completely sensible concern about privacy, we decided that it was probably better that a government instrumentalities, one that everyone knows, we've been around for a long time, we're a department with a very long history, 90-year history, so we decided that it was best for us to certainly step into that role to begin with.
Because security and health security and related issues is already part of your portfolio, isn't it?
Yes, it is, exactly. Right. And we have a long tradition of looking after the national interest, but also looking after individuals' interests as well.
Okay. The addendum to the ConOps document talked about there being another potential body that would take over. So what's the sort of the time frame that you're thinking about here?
I don't actually have a time frame in mind. We need to get this up and running. We need to learn the lessons that we will all learn through the early period, and at some point in the future we'll obviously have we'll review, and then we'll have a dialogue both with government but also with people more broadly about what's appropriate. So I'm not putting a deadline on this at all.
You think it's better to be outcomes focused as opposed to creating an artificial deadline? Is that what you're saying?
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I think to put an artificial deadline on these things, firstly, it sometimes makes people uncertain, but secondly, we have to see how this goes.
Yeah. Can you tell me what's the full scope of your responsibilities? I'm sure that's something a lot of people want to know.
We are the National System Operator, which means we have to be responsible for what goes on, auditing, ensuring security, ensuring privacy. So all of the things that I think community members would be concerned about. And we will be working not only in that role, but also in the role we have as a member of the NEDA board to make sure that all of these elements come together to, one, deliver to the community, but two, to protect people's privacy.
Okay. And the National Records Indexing Services is part of that?
Yes, it is.
Right. You will also be supported by a jurisdictional advisory committee and an independent advisory council.
That's right.
Have those members been appointed yet?
No, they haven't, and we're in the process of working through all of those arrangements in anticipation of that date, and you'll see announcements about that in due course.
Okay. And is that if you like, closed door decision making, or is there a process to apply?
There will be a process of nomination, and we'll be talking to our state and territory colleagues about that. But no, we're not anticipating that there'll be an advert in the newspaper asking people to apply, but certainly there'll be a process of consultation. And
will they have powers to act on your behalf?
Not formal legal powers, but certainly they will have responsibilities, and they'll have a charter in terms of what we expect of them. Legally, we have a view about what powers means, but in terms of will they have important responsibilities, yes, they will.
So then the next question is to ask about NETA and its potential ongoing role or not. There's obviously a lot of concern in the industry as to what's happening. The funding finishes on June 30, so is that it? You shut up shop?
We think the job won't be quite done on the 30th of June, so I'm not anticipating that NETA will be shutting up shop. Obviously, there are some funding issues that have to be resolved, and while it is true that the 1st of July is a very important date, things don't finish on the 1st of July. There's a lot of work still to do. So again, we're working on that at the moment.
How do you see NETA's role then in the future? What sorts of activities do you want them to focus on?
Look, that's something that governments are discussing at the moment, and it would be inappropriate for me to put my view when we haven't, as you know, we own this 50%, but we haven't resolved with our state and territory colleagues yet what that role is. I think you don't have to be Einstein to figure out the kinds of things that we might have in mind, but I really wouldn't want to preempt having a consensus amongst all the partners.
How do you see the next phase of the PCEHR and eHealth more broadly being funded?
So essentially from a government perspective, there is basic infrastructure to keep the system up and running, everything from identifiers through privacy, etc. Now obviously that's a key government responsibility. In terms of what happens out in individual practices, we obviously have a broad arrangement through Medicare, everything from PIP then to individual benefits, and we have to make sure that those systems are fit for purpose. But there's a lot of money that comes via those systems now, including through the PIP. And of course, industry has to make a decision about what it's going to invest in. And so I think, as is the case with health systems broadly, you'll see a number of parties, the Commonwealth Government, the state governments, individual practitioners and industry more broadly, and that funding mix isn't going to change.
You mentioned the industry needs to decide what they'll invest in. What do you mean by that?
Well, industry obviously does things like decide to develop software, decides to come into the market to deliver particular things, and industry will continue to have to make commercial decisions about where it sees opportunity in the market.
Which gets back to the question of needing sort of some long-range plans to the extent that you can understand and give those. Do you feel like there's a need to, if you like, articulate a longer-term vision for eHealth?
Well, I've been on the record on a number of occasions of saying that I think industry, one, can have great confidence that eHealth is going to be part of the warp and weft, the very fabric of how a health system operates. They can be completely confident we're not going back to records in shoeboxes. They can also be completely confident that government will ensure a regulatory arrangement and a privacy arrangement that will protect the consumer, will ensure the system can operate, and then the industry needs to say, well, what can I offer? What can I deliver to people that will make their practice easier, will make health outcomes better, and then they can go into the market and offer those products. But they can be absolutely confident that we see this as part of the fundamental architecture of a modern health system.
From the consumer perspective, there's been a lot of debate ongoing about the opt-in, opt-out.
Yes.
And I know that the government and DOH have been quite clear in saying it's not going to change.
Yes.
But will it change, in fact, on the basis of consumer adoption?
Governments have been very clear it needs to be opt-in. And I do not anticipate that that will change. The whole point about this is a level of personal control. I do not expect that the entire nation will opt in on the 1st of July. And actually, we don't want that. What we actually want is for gradual adoption, to have a measured approach to the deployment of eHealth. We'd like to see people with particular needs, so the particular target groups, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people being a good example, but people with chronic health conditions.
I can almost see some of the newspaper headlines. Unfortunately, people will start to try and get a metric sense of how well it's being adopted.
Yeah.
Do you have any guidelines, almost to say up front, we think that it will be a certain percentage of the population by X date? Have you worked out any of those ideas?
Look, we haven't set particular numbers and particular targets because I actually think it's not amenable to a steady growth path. What we'll see is obviously progressive adoption in the wave sites. So I think we've got it's over 1.4 million identities already registered. But what we want to see is a measured and orderly approach. And if you look at what's happened overseas, you actually have quite slow adoption to begin with. And that actually does enable people to see how the system works, to figure out if there are better and more effective ways to do things. So no, we're not going to set a nominated target. We are going to look to see how it is people go about using the system, what they find good, what they find bad, and so progressive adoption over time.
Okay. how will you be encouraging people to sign up? If you like, I'm asking, what's your marketing strategy?
Well, we actually have a partner who's working with us on this to make sure that not just individual doctors, not just individual software companies are thinking about it, but we're thinking about it right across the system. And so that change and adoption partner is thinking through how it is we should communicate with people, and obviously there'll be product, but also strategies that will flow from that.
And I'm presuming fairly soon, because we're not too far away now.
Yeah, but back to my earlier comment, we don't want to have a mass marketing approach to this, because at the end of the day, you don't want 22 million Australians to all register on day one. The system will build up its capacity over time, and so that's the way we should actually also proceed with the information.
Well, Jane Halton, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.